You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
Mark, do you know what the significance of February the 28th, 2006 is? For you and me.
I think I do, but you're going to have to remind me. Does it involve being in your attic at your house?
It does.
With a microphone and some very primitive gear?
It does, because that I worked out recently was the date of our first ever recording of a word-related podcast. And so since then, taking into account the times when the magazine was being published and then subsequently, and, when we started doing it weekly, and then we've done, Word in Your Attics and Word in Your Ear events, all these things recorded. Do you know how many podcasts we've done, Mark?
Well, it's got to be over 1,000, isn't it? Because we've done something in the region of 660 podcasts, just the two of us, the kind of weekly podcasts. And then we've done all the Word in Your Attic podcasts. We've done the where people talking about the record collections. We've done innumerable Word in Your Ear podcasts with authors talking about their books. Hundreds. Actually, we must be in the 1,500s now in total, mustn't we? Loads of other stuff too.
So people listening out there must be thinking two things. The first is obviously, what a lot of bollocks. What a lot of bollocks over such a long period of time. These two old buffoons have exchanged between each other, which is true. There's a great deal of bollocks out there and it's all still there to be enjoyed. And the other thing they may be thinking is, I really should be doing my little bit to ensure the continuation of this stream of bollocks. And there is a way that people can do that, isn't there, Mark? There's a way, some people are doing it already.
Well, quite a few people are doing it already, which is you can subscribe. If you go to patreon.com, you can subscribe and you can support us. And if you do that, of course, you get innumerable extra additional editorial things that we do. You get the Friday night quiz, don't you? Every Friday night there is an international live quiz, which is very, very good fun with prizes, quite a challenge. And also you get everything early, and you get various additional bits of editorial that we do.
You get everything first and you get everything in living colour where applicable. You get as good a deal as anybody gets. And, it's just worth bearing in mind that long before all these arrivists entered the world of podcasting, as they all have nowadays, haven't they? Every TV personality, every 2-bit radio presenter, every retired politician is out there starting a podcast, aren't they? Only quite recently, Mark you, we were doing this
18 years ago.
2006. We were doing this long before, all the big landmarks of the podcast story. We were doing this long before Serial was ever thought of. Never mind the rest is politics or all the rest of them. 2006 is when we started doing this. And do you know what's interesting? I just looked this up before we started recording. Do you know what? Who else got started in 2006?
Go on.
Taylor Swift. Oh, yeah. It was in the UK this week.
We covered in a very early edition of Word magazine.
Taylor Swift still has the kind of sheen of something new, doesn't she? Well, yeah. She's been doing that since before 2006. It's quite an extraordinary long career, isn't it?
Well, she had a hit. Didn't she have a hit record or a hit album when she was 12 in Nashville? I think she did.
Well, certainly young. Yeah, I can't remember specifically. So anyway, us and Taylor Swift, just give us a little proportion of the love that the universe hands out to Taylor Swift, and we'll be very happy. So just go to patreon.com/Word in Your Ear and find out more. Do you know what else I found out while I was waiting for us to start recording this?
Go on.
You know the actor Kevin Hart? You familiar with the actor Kevin Hart, the American kind of comedy actor?
Yeah.
I just happened to see a clip of him being interviewed by James Corden. I don't know why this came across my transom, but it did. And the question he put to him was, how much, Kevin Hart, did you make out of your appearance in the film Jumanji: The Next Level? But you, maybe like me, Mark, probably thought, I wasn't sure that there was a film, Jumanji: The Next Level. We all remember the original Jumanji. Decades ago when our kids were small and so forth. But obviously it's a franchise and it's led to further things. So Kevin Hart has been...
Jumanji 6, I remember. Jumanji 10.
Well, they could have been. Okay. Kevin Hart appeared in Jumanji: The Next Level, and he was asked how much money he made out of it. And he was slightly sheepish because he said, well, you have to bear in mind, I didn't take a kind of upfront fee really with that film. I just looked for a share of the back end, as they called it in Hollywood. So if the film does well, you will do really well out of it as well. But you don't have your massive kind of $10 million fee for appearing.
It's a gamble, isn't it? Yeah,
it's a gamble. Do you know he said this? Okay, on camera on a television program. He admitted, do you know how much he made, Mark, out of it?
Well, it's a question of just how many, but possibly it's going to be in the 10 million, but it's probably 5 million. No. More?
10? He wasn't sure whether it was 29 or $30 million.
Oh, my God.
That
one film.
That's one film. And that is, listen, Kevin Hart, he's fine. I like Kevin Hart. But you sort of think that those kind of paydays only happen to absolute megastars. But they don't necessarily. If you attach yourself to, if you get attached to a huge hit in the 21st century.
Yeah, but on a percentage deal. Exactly.
On a percentage deal.
Because you think it's all about the Tom Cruise character at the front who's just getting a wedge for being in the film.
But also things like Jumanji: The Next Level, it'll sell huge amounts of tickets in China and so forth, territories that weren't even there in the film universe, 30,
well, do you remember
40
that
years ago.
Recent thing about Tom Holland, the historian and podcaster, talking about how he'd Tom Holland mistakenly got some money that was due to the actor Tom Holland?
No, I'll tell you what it was. It wasn't a podcaster. It was Tom Holland and Tom Hollander had got mixed up.
It was Tom Hollander, that's right.
Tom Hollander.
And he said that the amount, which again was a sort of percentage deal for I think a Marvel film or something like that.
It was a Spider-Man, was it?
Yeah.
It was, I think it was some Spider-Man type thing.
Yeah,
And this was just residuals or something.
It wasn't the fee. No, it was residuals.
This just drips in over a period of time.
Yeah, it was something that maybe it was an annual thing or Tom Hollander just wept, I think. He thought, I'm in the wrong game.
Absolutely.
How can I appear as an orc somewhere?
Yeah. So anyway, so give us a little bit of that. Just go to patreon.com/word in your ear.
This is a junction in the Word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
Do you know what came out this week in 1984, Mark, 40 years ago?
I do, because I'm fairly sure you're referring to Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen.
It's extraordinary, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
40 years ago. Do you know,
Which ended up having 7 hit singles. Isn't it?
I remember that as if it was yesterday. I think it probably did have 7 hit singles, or as they put it, they used to put it at the time. They used to aim for an album in the 80s to go. This is a big American record companies, and this is after the example of Michael Jackson's Thriller and Madonna's Like a Virgin or whatever. Your ambition was for a record to go 6 deep. So yes. 6 deep means you had 6 singles. And each time you had a single, that was another dip, another scoop of ice cream. That was, that's how you justified the massive spend. And it's just
which really, Thriller started that kind of template to some extent. Didn't Thriller have 7 hit singles? I think it did.
That was 6. But 6 deep used to be what they talked about was the great ambition. Because then, if you can go and make a record called 6 deep, it was worth spending a fortune on making the record in the first place, and then making all the making all the kind of promotional moves that it took to sustain it. And particularly, that's the thing that I think about when I think of Born in the USA coming out 40 years ago this year. this is the kind of high watermark of the video age, isn't it? Really?
Well, that was the big issue, wasn't it? That you can't forget that now in the light of Springsteen today. But Springsteen was sort of slightly on the back foot in the early 80s, wasn't he? He was a big 70s rock act, but suddenly MTV, pop music, synthesizers.
I don't know if he was on the back foot, but I think there was a feeling that you had to compete in a very different way to keep your head above water, to be a huge name in the 80s. It was no longer good enough to go and, play to the faithful in colleges and, on the rock circuit and so forth. You had to burst out to a bigger audience. And that's the thing that happened for loads of people in the 80s. And of course, that's the thing that happened with Born in the USA, because when they were making it, Jazz Ever in Bruce Springsteen's case took absolutely ages because he agonized about absolutely everything. But John Landau said what people always say, what managers and record companies always say, is they say, well, it's really good, but I don't hear a single.
I don't hear a single.
I don't hear a single. We've discussed this many times, Tony Wadsworth.
I'm sure they say that when they do hear a single, actually, but they just want it to be as commercial as possible.
No, but we talked about this with Tony Wadsworth, friend of the pod, and Tony used to run EMI, recorded music in the UK, and he'd had loads of experience of this with Coldplay and people like Coldplay, that when you go in, you as the senior executive go into the studio to listen to what they've done, and if you received what they've done warmly, they are then susceptible to being told, if you did another one, it might be more commercial. So once you've marked their homework and given it 10 out of 10 VG, they are then prepared to give you a bonus. You know what I mean? Which is the track that is probably they already had in the back pocket, but is a lot more commercial. Well, actually, we go back to Thriller, Michael Jackson. I think I'm right saying the first version of Thriller didn't have Beat It and didn't have Billie Jean on it.
That's right.
And they said, it's not quite good enough. So went away.
But also you can understand that, because if you're the person making the record, it's a bit like when you work in magazines and you think it's usually the feature you spent so long working on, chiseling away. You think that's the one because it took you so much time and because you were so involved. That's the one that people are going to respond to. But it often isn't. It's the same with people from the outside the studio listening to what people have recorded inside. They can hear it differently. They don't associate it with the workload.
But anyway, so John Landau said it needs a hit. And so Bruce Springsteen got rather irate about this and in a fit of pique wrote a song bemoaning the fact that you can't just write a hit. You have to feel it. And the refrain of that song was, you can't start a fire without a spark. And that was, of course, Dancing in the Dark, which they then, if you listen to it now, it's extraordinary because it's not just a dance record. It's a disco record.
It is.
It's a disco record.
It's actually synthesizers rather than guitars for a start, which is so extraordinary. I remember thinking at the time, this doesn't sound like the way Springsteen normally sounds.
And then, not only is it immensely commercial disco record, you're going to shoot a video, and you're not going to shoot a modest little video. You're going to hire Brian De Palma, front rank Hollywood director. You're going to do a concert. I can't remember where they did it. They might have done it at Spectrum in Philadelphia. I can't remember. In a big arena where you're going to have a load of extras who just, I
think it was St. Paul Civic Center, wasn't it?
Oh, well, is it Minnesota?
Yeah, in Minnesota.
Okay, right. Okay. It was. And you're going to shoot this massive scale concert just in order to be able to get out of it a kind of 4-minute commercial for the Bruce Springsteen experience, because that's what it basically was, And you're also going to take away from him the one tool from which he's hardly ever separated, which is the guitar. Yeah,
I know, that was extraordinary.
And you're going to then send him away to practice it. And there is, if you go searching on YouTube, there is actually footage of Bruce Springsteen in a dance studio in front of a mirror doing those dance moves for Dancing in the Dark, you know.
He must have felt so naked and exposed.
Absolutely.
But the other thing is, have you ever seen the interview with Courtney Cox about this?
Go on.
Well, I thought it was so interesting because, as you know,
a lot of people don't know that the girl who he plucks out the audience there is Courtney Cox. Who was unknown.
Sweet little girl, a sort of tomboy girl with very short hair, who's in the front row and looks, and he walks down the front, doesn't he, looking at all the girls, and they're kind of choose me, choose me, choose me. Apart from her, actually, who just looks a bit scared, you know. But there's a lovely little interview I saw with her where she talks about it. She says that she was auditioned. Brian De Palma got in all these. They were actually all professional dancers. And she was known for being a pretty good dancer, but not fantastic. She was just an actress, really. And she watched all their auditions and said they were absolutely staggering. And when she got up there, she was so nervous and so awkward and so stiff and so kind of, you know, perfectly audience member, not very good at dancing, but thrilled to be there. And that's why she got the job. He immediately thought that if you actually, in the light of seeing her dance, if you got someone who was a really good dancer, it just wouldn't be authentic. It would look like she'd been, you know, the whole thing was a setup, which of course it was. And the other thing was that Bruce Springsteen knew that she'd been selected and he had to pick this girl, but he didn't know anything about her. So he had no idea that she was an actress or anything like that, which is quite interesting, really. So,
do you know, also she was, I think I'm right in saying she was the girlfriend of Ian Copeland, Miles Copeland's brother, who was the police's agent.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Is very well connected in the music.
Yes,
business.
she was.
But this whole thing of the beautiful, slightly embarrassed girl coming out the audience to dance with him, and just becomes so central to the whole Springsteen experience. And that's one of the points at which live music changes from being about music to being about spectacle. So if you went to see Bruce Springsteen on that tour, as I did numerous times, and on every single occasion, when they played that, there had to be a girl out the audience to dance with him to effectively reenact that ritual that had been set up in that video. And it's just, the thing about Born in the USA, I think it's a great record. I still think it's a great noisy, slightly vulgar 80s pop record. But the other thing about it is it's a triumph for branding. That whole thing, from the cover, you know, with the baseball cap, you know, stuck in his right hand.
Yeah, the kind of warm jeans. It was Annie Leibovitz took the picture. It's an incredibly studied piece, isn't it?
Incredibly. I mean, how self-conscious is that whole thing? I'm telling you what we're going to do. We're going to shoot your backside. We're going to put it on the cover of the record. You know, other great backsides that are on the covers of records. Neil Young's After the Dawn, famously. And it just became an absolutely extraordinary thing, an extraordinary ritual. And of course, that year was the year I went to the States with Whistle Test to film that interview with him, that people still get in touch with him and say, I've still got a VHS of your interview with him.
It's a fantastic interview. I can still remember bits about it. Was he talking about, he used the expression about painting a moustache on it, doesn't he? Isn't he talking about what he was worried that videos would do?
Doing a video, yeah, I asked him about doing a video. I mean, the weird thing about it is that it was done at the Spectrum in Philadelphia, and it was just, it's interesting to go back and remember just how restricted, access was in those days. Nowadays, Bruce Springsteen's on tour now. You could probably, fire up your computer this morning and you could be able to watch and hear what he did last night, wherever he is. Well, it wasn't like that in 1984, 85. It was incredibly restricted. And so, we were at the Spectrum in Philadelphia. I was with Mike Appleton, who was the editor of Whistle Test, and there was an American crew I think we picked up over there. And we were there 2 nights. And And we had to do the interview after the show on the first night. And we were just shown into a room backstage in the bowels of the Spectrum of Philadelphia. And it was about 2:00 in the morning. You know, these things were always done at 2:00 in the morning. You know, and you'd flown in the day before. So that's just at the point where the jet lag is really
absolutely
kicking.
Knackered.
You're absolutely knackered.
And he's still fired up by having been on stage about 2 hours beforehand.
But they were so restrictive. We sat in there and then the door opened and he was delivered in there and we sat him down and we just started. And then 25 minutes later, they came and door opened again, took him out. You know what I mean? It was as quick as that. So because pretty much everything that we talked about was used because it had to be. You had no choice, you know. And it's very difficult. Having a snappy conversation with Bruce Springsteen, let me tell you, is pretty much impossible because, Lord, he was born a rambling man. You know, he and that's fair enough, you know, because he's only worked out what he wants to say when he says it, really. You know,
that's true. He doesn't come with a load of pre-prepared sound bites. He's just there for a conversation.
Not at all. And so if you get him going on a subject like video or whatever, don't interrupt him. Just let him go, you know, because he might get to some point. So anyway, there's about 25 minutes. They were allowed to shoot 2 numbers, Born in the USA, which is obviously at the beginning, and they were allowed to shoot Cover Me because it was the next single. And then on the second night, they shot the numbers on the second night, but they cheated and managed to shoot also without anybody knowing. They managed to shoot the Detroit medley at the end of the set, you know, from the back of the place, and then put it together with the audio from the No Nukes concert.
Very good.
Pass that off as being done on the most recent tour. You know, it's just full of dodgers like that. You know, that's how it had to be done. But let me tell you, it broke Bruce Springsteen in the United Kingdom. That film did. No doubt about that.
It did. That's true.
It really as simple as that. You know, it was what.
No, it made him a household name.
It did.
Whistle Death did that a couple of times. Actually, it did with ZZ Top as well. Actually, just certain acts they just picked on at that precise moment. It worked.
Yeah. So 40 years ago, I can hardly believe it.
The Word Podcast. Prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
We've both been watching a little bit of this new series. Well, not new, actually. It's been out a while now. It's in its third series, Loudermilk, on Netflix.
Is it in its third series?
I think it's in its third series. I think it is. Well, we've only just discovered it. But it's so interesting, and it's broadly about, I don't know anyone else is watching it who's listening, but it's broadly about the story of a guy who was a rock critic and then became an alcoholic and kind of his marriage fell apart. And he's now running these kind of therapy courses for recovering boozers. They're kind of, they're what do you call it, 12-step program type things. And it's just interesting because obviously there's lots of rock music references all the way through. It's made incidentally by Peter Farrelly, who made, There's Something About Mary and Dumb and Dumber. Really, really well written. And they're constantly he goes into record shops and they have arguments about whether Nirvana would exist without the bubblegum hits of the 60s. And somebody mentions Saul Zant.
Yeah.
And he says, Saul Zant was, he's the man who charged Creedence to listen to their own music, and we had to listen to Put Me in Coach for 20 years as a result. He describes Segovia as being the Hendrix of guitar players, except he didn't OD, so no one's ever heard of him. And he's incredibly kind of cynical and withering character, isn't it? And it's interesting, we were talking about this the other day, the idea that rock critics, when they're played in fiction, High Fidelity being a really good example, particularly the Jack Black character, they have a certain personality which is bitter, resentful, crabby, isn't it? They're unable. The whole thing about the lead character in High Fidelity is his girlfriend wants to prove to him that you can like people who don't have the same musical taste as you. He has a habit of going into people's houses, looking at their record collections, and the moment he finds a Simply Red album or a Phil Collins album, he says, I cannot possibly be friends with these people. And there's an amazing bit where in this, the character who plays Loudermilk, the ex-rock critic, is this girl who lives next door, and he's really keen on, and she's vaguely keen on him, who keeps getting appalled by what a dreadful bloke he is. And she's read the book that he wrote. It's called, I think it's All You Need Is Love and 50 Other Songs to Kill Yourself To. Isn't that right?
Yes, it is.
And she said, I read your book. You said, you gave the Spin Doctors Pocket Full of Kryptonite 5 stars. And he goes, well, the video hadn't come out yet. I didn't know the guy was going to wear a Peruvian sheep farmer's hat, And she says that he gave Odelay by Beck 1.5 stars. And he says, well, it was personal. It's the idea that those critical things are so important to him. His judgment about records. The records are right. When she says you're really, really kind of cynical, and he says, well, that comes with the territory, isn't it? You're a rock snob. He says that comes with the territory of being right all the time. And that's that classic thing about ex-rock critics, is they kind of believe that they are right. They're not just opinions. What they say is absolutely factually correct. This is a great record, and that's a terrible record. But don't you think it's interesting the way it... The way people imagine, it's actually very bad publicity for the idea of people our age with our kind of record collections. Because people think we're all these miserable, list making, cynical, people for whom music doesn't really make them happy. It's just something to grumble about.
It's funny how the idea of the kind of rock bore has kind of escaped real life. And vanished into entertainment, where it's kind of reborn as a kind of a new sort of stereotype, like, I don't know, the Latin lover or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a thing that writers reach for. And the great turning point sequence in this story is it's an old film now, probably more than 40 years old, maybe, is Dinah, where Daniel Stern is one of the guys who's obsessed with music, and he finds that his girlfriend has played one of his records and has put it back in the wrong place.
In the wrong place, that's right.
And he just flies off the handle.
Can't forgive her.
I don't know what it is. It's James Brown. She's put it in jazz or something, and then he says to her, pick a record, any record. So she picks a record, whatever, and he goes, ask me what's on the B-side. she asks him, and he tells her entirely, gives a chapter and verse, and tells her who the publisher was, pretty much, and you think. Yeah, I know which male traits this is seeking to, guy. But I've known rock bores, but I've never known a rock bore like that. You know what I mean? That these characters, and I suppose just in the nature of movie characterization, isn't it? That, I don't know anybody
but isn't it also
who suddenly volunteer some parallel with Saul's ants while in a coffee shop. It's just ridiculous. What you never see in those films is where this sort of stuff really comes out, which is when you get a bunch of rock critics together.
Yeah.
Because that's when they'll go in a faintly amused fashion, because they know how ridiculous they sound.
Oh, it is.
They'll go, do you know what? I'm cursed with the knowledge of being able to tell you exactly, who played bass or whatever. That's what they do, because it is.
But then they're kind of shrugging and knowing about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're just being pathetically competitive here. It's all about it's like that whole thing about Beatles, which is your favourite Beatles song. People always pick this up with kind of Hey Bulldog because it's not that well known. It obviously is fantastic. And then gets more, and then you get people saying, it's you know my name, look up the number or something, for the simple reason that they just think, well, no one else will pick this, and it's so obscure that hopefully a lot of people won't even have heard of it. It just becomes ridiculous.
I do think,
but also I think the rock critic in films is played like that because that's where the comedy is. What's comic about the character Loudermilk is that he is just so bad-tempered and so curmudgeonly and so rude to people. And that all stems from being this kind of bitter, twisted, resentful guy who made a living out of reviewing rock albums and liking certain records and thinking they're really important. He goes on about how she has a Prince album. She thinks that'll impress him. He says, yeah, but the Prince album you've got is Come by Prince, which he deliberately made to be bad so he could get thrown off his Warner's deal, you know. It's that whole world of loving groups like, Beck Odelay. Beck is a really good example. So Beck's a very rock critic thing, you know. The Replacements, acts like that. You know.
That's a very rock critic thing, isn't it?
It is.
I tell you what struck me as slightly odd with Loudermilk is that, I'll tell you the thing that always strikes me with any TV drama is these people live in an apartment or a house which is far bigger and better than they would be able to afford in real life. You know, so Loudermilk and his kind of no good mates, they occupy this apartment that's massively spacious.
It's enormous. And he goes on about how desperate it is that he's got to have a roommate. And he says, what do they do for a living now? He says, well, I clean up the mess that banks make. What he actually means is that he has a cleaning job at night when he goes in and polishes the marble foyers, you know. So he's making no money and he has no money. And, as you say, it's like the Friends apartment, isn't it? Which is massive.
It is. But I tell you what, in this particular case, what's even odder is that they've obviously said to the designer that he's got to live surrounded by records, you know. So in every shot in the background, there's a kind of pile of records. It's never quite a complete shelf because they obviously haven't got that many. But the other thing is, and this is a very American thing, they don't show you any particular records because they would have to clear them with the copyright owners, and they don't like doing that. And so lots of them are kind of fictitious, the stuff that you see. And I do think that's interesting because if you had a real copy of, I don't know, After the Gold Rush or The Replacements, you know, Don't Tell a Soul or whatever it's called, or, you know, or Prince album, whatever, there is an odd thing about real records that once you introduce them into a kind of fictitious context, they overpower the fictitious context. Do you know what I mean? You know, if somebody had a real copy of Revolver in the middle of a scene, I wouldn't be able to take my eyes off the copy of Revolver. I don't know why. Do you know what I mean? Because
you're right. And also it reminds you that everything else is fictitious and you're dragged back into the real world. And therefore you suddenly think the fictitious world is somehow unimportant and slight and superficial and ridiculous, although you were enjoying it 30 seconds ago because you've now been presented with the concept of Revolver, which is magnificent and real. And real.
And more real,
so right.
Certainly more real than the fictitious world, but also kind of more real than the real world.
Yeah, it is.
So you can't do that. But anyway, I quite enjoyed it.
It's good. No, I've only watched about 4 or 5 of them. But anyone listening who hasn't seen Loudermilk on Netflix, it's really recommended, and it's brutal and it's really cynical and bitter, but it's funny, and you will see elements of yourself in it. I'm sure. I did.
The Word Podcast, one of the few things you really need in life.
I don't know if you noticed that Liam Gallagher played this show the other night. I think it was in Sheffield. And obviously this is the anniversary year of the release of Definitely Maybe. So broadly what he was doing to some extent was doing a kind of doing the whole of the Definitely Maybe album with other material. But I thought it was really interesting. I had a look at the set list, and apart from I Am the Resurrection by the Stone Roses and I Am the Walrus by the Beatles, he played Definitely Maybe, I think a few other Oasis songs, but he played not one single song by Liam Gallagher. So what you're effectively getting is the whole Oasis experience as enacted by one person. And I thought that was really interesting, because normally you're not going to be convinced. You know, if John Fogerty or Sting or Lou Reed or Susanna Hoffs or Paul Weller or Bruce Dickinson, I'm trying to think of people who were singers in groups who've gone out on their own, did a whole concert reenacting one of their albums, I don't think you'd be convinced by that, because a lot of the time it's to do with not just the voice, but to do with some instrumental element in that sound, which is absolutely crucial. Classic examples is the Pink Floyd. You know, when Roger Waters left the Pink Floyd, he thought, well, that's the end of the Pink Floyd, surely. But the voice of the Pink Floyd was David Gilmour, and the sound of the Pink Floyd was also David Gilmour. So if you had the guitar sound of the Pink Floyd and the voice, you've effectively, for the person at the back, or for the person who really doesn't care, you've got the Pink Floyd. I thought in this case, Noel Gallagher's guitar is not particularly, demonstrative and significant. It's just fairly standard, isn't it? You know, out come the old guitar solos, which he always plays note for note exactly the same. But it hasn't got a particular sound. It's not like the Roger Daltrey without Pete Townsend. You know, what I'm saying is that now, on his own, Liam Gallagher effectively is Oasis for a lot of people, isn't he? He's playing these huge venues.
Well,
obviously, if Noel Gallagher was there, obviously it would be an infinitely bigger deal. But for a lot of people, you are getting the sound, completely authentic sound of what those songs sound like, without anybody apart from, with only one original member of the group.
Are there any? Because the way these things normally go is there would be some section of the fan community who would believe that the true spirit of Oasis is Noel, for instance.
Yeah.
Do you get that? Do you get diehards who say, "No, I'm never going to listen to Liam. I'm a Noel man." Do you get that?
God, I've got no idea, actually. Do you think they do?
I don't know. Well, it's normally the case, isn't it?
Yeah, there must be some who just got their heels in on principle and thought, I will not go and see this group until they reunite.
Whereas Liam appears to have just, taken it over by stealth.
He has.
Although, obviously...
Again, and that's one of those extraordinary things that I don't think you would have got the short odds on him. When they split up, the two brothers, everyone just imagined, including Noel himself and probably Liam too, that Noel was the one who was going to come out on top.
So if Noel, if for any reason there was a reconciliation, would they be any bigger than he is on his own?
I think they would be infinitely bigger.
Would they?
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, he's still enormous, isn't he? And he's playing stadiums 2 or 3 nights, and it'd be a much bigger deal.
That's pretty big. A stadium 2 or 3 nights.
I think he is.
Big.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary, really. And also, there's no sense of a kind of comeback, is there? This will just presumably, following what Rod Stewart said to you all those years ago, that if Liam hangs on to his hair, which is the key issue.
That was what Rod Stewart said. I said, how long will he keep doing it? He said, as long as I've got the barnet.
So, Liam Gallagher has one of those, tonsorial arrangements that he doesn't mess with, does he at all? He hasn't gone through a period of wearing it any differently, has he?
No.
In fact, I'm going to go further. Liam Gallagher, and I don't speak as a kind of expert in these cases, but so how long is it since Oasis got started? How many years are we saying, Mark?
Well, they would have got
90s. So the early 90s. When
92,
they came,
was it? Yeah.
Okay, so they came to prominence. So it's 30 years ago, right? 30 years, nothing has changed in the Liam Gallagher universe. Not anything at all, has it? He does he broadly
did. Almost wears the same clothes.
He
says the same things. He's sort of got the same haircut.
Makes the same noise. Now,
he stands the same way on stage, doesn't he? With his legs bowed apart, with his hands behind his back. He probably still sits on the drum riser and drinks cans of lager while there's a solo going on.
He is the most conservative concept in the history of popular music, is Liam Gallagher. He is. Now, you don't compare him with anybody else. Look how absolutely everybody else changed one way or another. Elvis Presley, David Bowie, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, absolutely anybody you care to name. They went through periods where they changed and then they went back. And Liam Gallagher never changed at all. He just kept on. He didn't even notice. I'm going to go further. He sort of didn't even notice when his brother left the group. He just kept doing that.
But actually, you're completely right, because on the musical front, you think that everybody at some stage, Paul Weller, think of all the experiments he went off and did, style councils, synthesizers and all that. The things that Liam Gallagher have done is maintain some of the people that were involved in. Well, actually, he kept going with pretty much the original with the other guys from Oasis, didn't he? He made music that sounded exactly like Oasis, and his latest collaboration has been with the group that inspired Oasis in the first place, which was John Squire of the Stone Roses. So the only person, it's not like he's gone off and made a record with a hip hop performer, or gone into electronic music or done anything remotely different. That's interesting, isn't it?
And so there will be none of the normal pattern that takes place in a pop star life, which is early success, run away from it, try and do something different, rejoin, reconciliation, revival. Everybody comes back to relive their young life. With Liam Gallagher, you never have to leave it behind in the first place. You just keep on doing. So going back to what I was saying, as long as the hair is there, he will be, I confidently predict, Mark, doing exactly the same thing when he's 72 years old. I guarantee you.
He will.
And he'll be earning, Kevin Hart style money.
Which he is already.
Which he probably is already, So,
but then that's this just indicates also that there's a very, very, very significant number of people who don't want him to change. They would like it to be exactly the same.
Well, I'm sure. Well, I think that applies to music fans generally, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
Play some old as well.
Play some old.
Well, Liam.
Be like you were when I loved you.
Liam Gallagher's your man.
The Word Podcast, 2 cocoa tins and a piece of string.
So I had the quiz on Friday evening, as usual, which is for our Patreon supporters. And if you've never taken part in this, the way it works is we have 10 visual clues to the identity of a legendary LP, and people have to guess. They have one guess, and obviously the earlier you guess, the more, if you get it right, the more points you get, and points mean fabulous prizes, don't they, Mark? Including, fridge magnets from all over the world.
This week it was. This month it was a Parthenon fridge magnet.
Parthenon fridge
I'd bought in Athens.
There you go.
How could you not want one of those?
Absolutely. Well, anyway, one of the people who takes part in this is Blaine in Canada, and Blaine has taken part in it so long that every week he volunteers very early, secretly to Mark, we don't know this at all, what his wife's guess as to what the album is. So she's choosing from the absolute universe of absolutely anything.
And he did get it right once. And so, as is the gambling tradition, he carries on thinking the lightning might strike a second time. And he pretty much got it this month.
So this week, the answer was Tom Waits' Rain Dogs. And Blaine,
she predicted that 2 weeks ago.
He predicted 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So just, so near, yet so far.
So,
if you want to take part, you can find out how to do so, patreon.com/word in your ear. What else?
And we should mention some of the other interview stuff we've done. We just put up, actually. We did a fantastic piece with Giles Smith, old friend of the podcast, great writer. The guy wrote Lost in Music, which I'm sure a lot of people have read. And he's written this book about ABBA, which is just marvellous, isn't it, Dave?
It is very good.
Absolutely wonderful.
It's about why we love ABBA, basically.
Why we love ABBA, and full of these wonderful little maxims. One of my favourites was, I think actually was quoting somebody in the NME, which he said that there were 2 types of wedding disco. Ones that started with Dancing Queen by ABBA, and terrible ones.
Yes.
It's truths like that. And we also interviewed John Savage, which is going up, I think, next week. John Savage has written, who wrote England's Dreaming, and a wonderful book about teenage, and a book about 1966. And he's written this terrific book about the LGBTQ community.
It's called The Secret Public, How LGBTQ Resistance Shaped Popular Culture, 1955 to 1979. And that's just out.
It's really interesting. He comes up with all sorts of good theories. Lovely bit where he talks about how Andrew Loog Oldham used camp as a weapon with the Stones. Really original way of looking at things. That's good.
It is. And we also spoke to Steve Turner Yes,
Steve Turner. That was a while ago now. Yeah, Steve Turner read a book called King Mod about a guy called Peter Meaden, who was the original manager of The Who and originally encouraged the Who to become mods. And in fact managed them, styled them, and wrote their early singles. A really major architect of fashion and music.
No longer with us, but it's a kind of sad story in the end, but it's an extraordinary little story. And he's been trying to, he did an interview with him in the mid-'80s, a rare interview with Peter Meaden, and that's the kind of basis of the book. And he's been looking to get it turned into a book ever since, and he's finally done so. So if you're a student of, and I know many people are, of kind of mod culture, that's a must read. So and I'm just going to briefly mention Andy Gunton, who wrote in saying if anyone, he's got his entire collection, or the first 136 issues of Q magazine, which because they're moving house or whatever, he wants to find a new home for. I think, I can't tell if he wants to sell them or give them away or whatever, but if anybody would like, he wants to do them in one lot. Anyone would like the first 136 issues of Q. Still, he says, all sealed within plastic covers and boxed, then get in touch with us and we'll pass on your address. And also, thanks very much to Brian Nankovich, who the Australian listener who sent that wonderful clip, which we'll put at the end of this too, the clip of Steve Harley appearing on the TV show that he produced, playing an absolutely amazing version of Come Up and See Me, Make Me Smile. It's really, really good, actually. So we'll thanks for sending that in too. So thanks for listening, and stay in touch, and we'll be back with you next week.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.